The Teachers Guild of New South Wales acknowledges the traditional custodian of the various lands on which we work today and the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people participating in this event. We pay our respects to elders past, present of the Aboriginal peoples and their ongoing cultures and connections to the lands and waters throughout Australia. Ladies and gentlemen, my name is Dr. Fred Osman. As the President of the Teachers Guild of New South Wales, I'd like to thank you for joining us for our Guild Education series on the topic today, how can we transform education by building better schools for students? It is my great pleasure to be joined by a distinguished panel to discuss this important topic more broadly. Our panel this evening includes Dr. Vicki Cameron, Chief Education Officer, PeopleBench, Building Better Schools Workforces; Phillip Heath, Head of Barker College; Tim Watson, Principal of Northern Beaches Christian School; and Kathryn Taylor, Director of Wellbeing Australia and Turning Point Consulting, who will be moderating this event. Thank you for our panel for joining us today. For some housekeeping, please feel free to share your experiences, thoughts, and questions in the chat function, and pose any questions to the panel through the Q&A box on the Zoom control panel. Please keep your Q&A questions short and relevant to the topic on what we're talking about today. Our host will moderate and will tend to ask questions during our discussion panel. Thank you, Vicki, Phillip, Timothy, and Kathryn for joining us today.
Beautiful. Thank you very much, Fred. I'm Kathryn Taylor, as Fred mentioned, and I'll be helping to lead these discussions tonight. So warm welcome from me, and I do wish to acknowledge the Aboriginal elders, current, past, and future as well. The topic tonight's a fascinating one. Look, in terms of where we're at in education, this is such an opportune moment for us to really reflect on where we have been and where we are going, and how we can possibly set ourselves up for more successes in those years ahead. Just to give a little bit of a background in terms of where I've come from. So as Fred mentioned, I'm Director with Wellbeing Australia, which we focus on positive, proactive strategies around managing wellbeing across Australia, but also have networks throughout the world. Wellbeing is definitely topical in education at the moment, so I'm sure that will come through to a lot of our workforce planning conversations as well. The second hat that I'm wearing tonight is the director of my own business, Turning Point, where I've been working in that HR space for over 20 years, working in education and other sectors around workforce planning, talent mapping, mergers, acquisitions, and so on and so forth. So tonight, I really do want to welcome our panel. I think we are so fortunate to have such experienced professionals and leaders in this field to share their experiences and thoughts with us. So I'm very, very grateful for all of you. Just to help everyone in the room know who we are, maybe Vicki, can you kick off just giving us a little intro to who you are and what experience you've got in this space?
Absolutely. So I've been a teacher, a school leader and a school principal, and I currently am Chief Education Officer in a company called PeopleBench. And PeopleBench, we really are a school workforce benchmarking and data house. We also do consulting in school workforces. My story in school workforce really started when I was in school leadership, and I realised that one of the missing links that we had was in the HR space. We spent 80% of our money, and I spent 80% of my time as a school leader on workforce issues. So I actually studied HR, human resource management, and then I went on and did my doctorate in recruitment and selection of teachers, because I felt that this was an emerging space and a space where we really needed to spend more time being strategic as opposed to just putting out fires all the time.
Beautiful. What a fabulous sort of breadth of experience you've got. That's brilliant. And Phillip, would you like to share a little bit about how you've come to today?
Thanks, Kathryn. Well, first of all, thank you everybody for tuning in. I know that it's a tough time of day to ever do that, and so we're enormously gratified and flattered. Well done as ever to the Teachers Guild. Always on the money, great topics, and so really appreciate that. It's a great honour to be part of a little group like this one, and great to share some of the war stories. I'd also like to acknowledge the traditional owners wherever you're listening. It's in my case, it's Darug. I also recognise Darkinjung, Wanneroo and Yolngu people, where we've got little campuses for Indigenous children as well, scattered across New South Wales and then one in Northeast Arnhem Land. So I'm the head of Barker. I've been in this role since 2014. It's my third headship. So in 1995, I started when I was about 11 at St Andrew's Cathedral School and had a lot of fun in experiencing some challenges and some tough days and some really stimulating and fulfilling and euphoric days, and finished that role in the mid 2009. Went down to the ACT and was the principal of Radford College, really marvellous school in Canberra. So I got to see another system and enjoyed that school very much. And as I say, became the 9th head of Barker in 2014. So I'm in the 9th head and in my 9th year as that role, and learning every day. And I certainly agree with your comments, Kathryn. A large portion of the job is to do with caring for the carers, upholding the arms of Vicki. I think you made that comment, forgive me. But it's right, and holding up their arms and strengthening them and encouraging them to be the ones out there doing the frontline delivery. It took me a long time to figure that out, but I can share a little bit more about that a little bit later on. Barker has a total headcount staff population of about 1,000.
Beautiful.
So it's enough to keep me occupied.
And it's wonderful to reflect on that growth throughout those years, isn't it? I think that's something that's really important to share, because I'm sure tuning in and watching us later are aspiring leaders who are early in their career and leaders who have been in their leadership roles in various schools for many, many years. So that continuing to learn is so true and so true. So relevant for all of us. And Tim, we haven't forgotten you. Do you want to share a little bit about where you're at, please?
Yeah, hi, Tim Watson. I'm coming to you from Garrigal Land here at Northern Beaches Christian School. I started here as the principal in 2018, having previously been for 10 years the deputy principal at Roseville College. We have 1,160 kids and 140 staff, so not quite as many staff as up at Barker. Thankfully, I think 140 seems to me to be a good number, and it's a fantastic staff. So it's a great joy for me to do my job, and my role is really manifest through others. They have a much bigger impact than I do, and that's one of the exciting things about the topic tonight, is that it's people focused. And schools are a people pursuit. Now, we were chatting today about the way that, people and structures come together, and sometimes that creates problems, whether that be sort of in computer systems or in just HR systems, whatever it is. And so to keep the people focused while making the systems work is a really interesting challenge. Absolutely. And I've been working in education. I've figured out this is my 31st year.
Again, started at 11.
Yeah, about that.
Look, it's interesting, and where the experiences that we're talking about, there are different sectors in education, obviously. So there are different spaces in terms of how that workforce planning will look. But education has got such a long history in terms of workforce, in terms of volume of staff, in terms of how it's structured. I think at the moment, that considerable change that we've faced due to the last few years where, we had the opportunity to uproot what was the tradition or the routine. We had the opportunity to reinvent and innovate where we were at and experience things in a way that we may not have otherwise been able to do. So tonight, I think it's really important that we get the opportunity for this conversation. And I do give credit to the Guild for raising that conversation around transformation in education through that workforce. And I think often we speak of education around students, but that whole community is what we're looking at. So I guess just to kick us off, maybe Vicki, you could share your thoughts, that future focused sort of school workforce strategies, that whole planning of what are we needing to do with our workforce? Is there something we need to do differently to attract people from school leavers through to, experienced career changers that might be looking for something new? Is there something we need to think about in education in that way?
Well, I think firstly, we need to change the narrative about education. And I think we need to be looking at attracting people into teaching from different areas. The traditional finish school and go into teaching. We maybe need to start earlier in life cycle. Perhaps look at our year 10s and, be promoting the teaching, teaching to them. We also need, you mentioned career changes. I think career changes are a great source that is still largely untapped. A lot of people that fell out of mining industries, they're the sort of people that we could bring into teaching because they've got so much worldly experience, plus most of those people have degrees, so it's something that we need to look at future focused. It's also, I think, we need to change the dynamic of the teaching, or change the dynamic of the school workforce. Traditionally, people have gone into school leadership and the deputy principal has been in charge of staffing. We need to bring in expertise from outside, like human resource management people from outside to kind of give us a new perspective. Rather than expecting our school leaders to actually do everything, to be managers of finance, to be HR managers, to be all of those things to all people. So I think it's a way also of keeping, because we're facing a teacher shortage, so it's a way of keeping the educators focused on the education, which is where we really need them.
It's interesting because it's almost like a project management mentality you're speaking about, where we're thinking beyond schools being teaching as their solo sort of remit. Tim, what about you in terms of attracting that, the future planning? So certainly from that, how do you look at attracting those staff from different levels of experience?
Yeah, I think part of it, or the heart of it really, is that it's a people game. So you've got to be pretty keen on people with all their greatness and all their foibles. And then probably part of it's about fit. So we get the right people and the right fit. So not every school is going to be a good fit for every staff member. If you get that right, half the problems sort of are semi-resolved. We've been fortunate the last little while by a quirk of geography that we have access to sort of two, in a sense, discrete pools of staff, which has been pretty wonderful. So our approach has been, okay, how can we make sure that people come to work and have a strong sense of purpose? And what are the things that we do that support that? What are those points of friction for teachers, whether it's about the general demeanour and culture and behaviour of kids, or the other factors that go into the day-to-day life of teachers that we can seek to address? We don't always do it that well, but at least we're thinking about it.
The purpose piece is quite key, isn't it? I mean, that's where we're driven from a sense of self, from a wellbeing perspective. It's the founding element, having that clarity of purpose, feeling connected to our purpose and feeling we're living our mission in that way. So we'll come back to that in a little bit. But Phillip, with the volume of staff you're working with, I'm keen to understand how you have sought staff from the different levels. So Vicki mentioned about, year 10 students, those students at earlier levels, being able to capture them. How have you approached getting the breadth of staff you would be needing?
Yeah, thanks, Kathryn. Part of our volume comes from a fairly expansive co-curricular program. So there's a large number of casuals, and so the head count was somewhat inflated by those realities of debating coaches and sports coaches and the like, and then some part-time folk and whatnot. But it's a large group, but it speaks to the issue of how do you renew, how do you build succession, how do you then equip, and then to use that phrase, onboard, so that there is still a kind of coherent narrative around the cultural values of the school, whatever school that might be. So is there a shared language and expectation? Is there a school lexicon and grammar? And then how do you look to keep renewing that and refreshing that so that it doesn't become either tired or just repeated for the sake of kind of aping a position? So over the last few years, we've morphed the HR team into quite intentionally people and culture. And I know that's a bit modish, but the more I wrestled with how do we do this, the more I became committed to the idea that the HR department is not about regulation and the administrative burden that is considerable about recruitment, but actually about understanding, as Tim said, people and their purposes, and what is it that's their value proposition, and in return, what are they hoping to grow from by being part of this community. And then culture. Every person will shape a community one way or another. It won't remain the same one way or another, that it will be shaped and influenced by them. And we should be intentional about that. So to go to your question, a lot of our younger graduates form the core of the co-curricular support. Some of those then go on to train in the various fields in which they're interested, say physiotherapy, or in music and music performance, or in drama, or in teaching, and making sure that there's the right fit. And the last thing to add, I think, this again, a little bit of a personal journey, is the value of metrics. So have a good understanding of where your team is at, and not just use data in a slavish sense, but use it to analyze and inform. Do we need to look at gender balance? Do we look at age profile, and the academic preparation, and then be a little bit more targeted about, well, where do we need to put a little bit more energy, and then the whole value proposition of belonging. What are you joining? Because I think one of the things that's changed almost profoundly, almost unrecognizably, is that people want to be part of something that they think is worthy of their energies. So, you know, I was once told by somebody who was doing similar work to yours, actually, Kathryn, who was that a fair portion of people will just turn up because they've got a mortgage, and you know, and that's fine. I was then told about a third of the people will really get on board and love what you're doing, and about 10% will just dislike it because they don't like your fragrance, or they don't like the way you walk, or they don't like your choice of ties, or whatever it is. It took me a long time to deal with that, to understand that, to not be personally wounded by it. Particularly if you're a bit of a heart leader, as I have tried to be, to not take it too much to heart. When you put your heart into something, not everyone joins in that way. So it's a complex web of things, but the main message in this portion is the people and culture thing. That's been and having exactly the right people there to help has been amazing. Really has helped the job so much.
It's an interesting comment, that leading with the heart, because Tim, I'm sure you're the same from the way you spoke, that leading with the heart comes first. So remembering to get the metrics or the data to inform what we're doing, to be able to look from a more global perspective at what we're leading, allows us to be more informed rather than reactive. Whereas I think for the last few years, with the shortage of teachers, with the increase in sick leave, with all of the challenges we've had, there's almost a feeling of, actually, I need to just keep plugging holes. Whereas what we need to be doing is, as you both rightly say, looking forward. So Vicki, can you share that? Phillip mentioned onboarding, and Tim spoke about how he was bringing that mission piece in with his staff as well. What would be the ideal process or consideration for people in their onboarding process to really tap into that people and culture best?
Well, firstly, I'd just like to digress a little bit and talk about fit. I think before you get to the onboarding, fit is very important. You know, I think that Phillip mentioned two things that really resonated well with me, is firstly fit, and I think that's about context, because some teachers are better suited to certain context. As we all know, context is very important. Schools have such a wide range of contexts. and that people and culture piece that Phillip also mentioned, because once you call your HR people and culture as opposed to HR, you're already stepping into the strategic headspace. So you're already looking at that long-term planning as opposed to putting out fires and just being operational. So I think that's those points really resonated with me. And then, of course, now coming back into the onboarding, once you've got your fit, once you've got your workforce strategy, once you've got the right people that fit, then your onboarding is really about enculturating them and also helping them to actually lead cultural change as well, because most people will, again, as Phillip mentioned, most people will bring a little bit to the culture, and that's what you want. You don't want all of the culture to stay the same. The culture is something that there are parts you want to preserve, and there are parts that perhaps you need to move on to move forward. So that onboarding is very important for all of those reasons. Plus, I think something that's very close to my heart is onboarding is particularly important for early career teachers. We've got a dreadful history of most recently losing a large percentage of our early career teachers. And I feel we've got to stem that very quickly. And that's where the onboarding comes in, is really giving those early career teachers the right mentoring, the right experience when they step into your school. It's really so that they start off, they know who they've got to go to, they know, simple things like, what is the photocopier key, but there are also more complex things, as in who can they go to for advice? So, they need to have a mentor. So I think that's a very important part of the onboarding as well.
And you mentioned that early career, which is definitely something that has been, the data's there in terms of the challenges around that space. Tim, can you maybe share with us a little bit of insight as to how you've approached the, newer teachers coming through, particularly those early graduates, in how you support them to be able to feel more connected and informed in what they're doing?
Yeah, our mentoring program runs for the first 2 years of their being at the school. And I think it's important to have that run across a couple of cycles so there's more opportunity for reflection. One of the things I've noticed is that some of our new graduates are actually way further down the track than you might expect. And the reason for that is a lot of them have been involved in leading local youth groups or church groups or sporting groups or whatever it is. And they've done, by the time they finish their degree, they've done maybe 5 or 6 years worth of leading small groups or the equivalent of classes. So when it comes to managing behaviour, which is often quite a difficult thing for new teachers to do, they're actually like they've been teaching for 7 years. And so that aspect of it, coupled with the cultural benefits of a really close, okay, what are we here for? We're here for learning. We don't want to disrupt it. Let's make that the focus for kids and for staff. That really means that there's a big chunk of the problematic that is addressed for them quite early by their experience and by our approach. The other thing in my thinking of late has been we, as teachers, have really valued our autonomy. And as part of that, we've got into this cycle of almost wanting to prepare bespoke lessons every time. So no, it's got to be different. It's got to be. And actually that places a massive and an unfair burden on young teachers. I actually think it's also probably not as sound from a teaching perspective as we might imagine. And so we've got to be really careful to share good quality resources and to be open source, if you like, with everything that we've prepared. And one of my great delights this year has been working with a staff member who's about 4 years in, and we're teaching Year 12 modern history classes together. And she's bringing a lot to it that I don't have, and I'm bringing some to it that she doesn't have. And there's this great mutuality. And where that's possible with younger staff members, gee, it's helpful. It's been great for me. I've learned as much from her as she has from me.
So true. That recognition of we're all bringing different pieces to the table is so important. Phillip, you mentioned that you have the coaching staff, the part-time, the casuals, all of those different elements. Something we haven't always spoken a lot about or considered well in workforce planning is maybe that bridging between teaching and non-teaching, for one of a better expression. Your operations, your marketing, your people and culture, all of those. How have you approached development, support, engagement of those staff to bring that holistic view together?
Yeah, it is an endemic issue in schools. because you have teaching and non-teaching. They often have separate multi-enterprise agreements, separate sets of workplace practices, different preoccupations. A few years ago, under the People and Culture leader, we wanted just to test whether there was a values alignment between what the school said about itself and what the staff felt. And we then asked everybody, support staff, grounds, maintenance, gardens, teaching, obviously, account staff, and the ICT staff, all of whom have quite different narratives. And we used an external organisation to come in and do an assessment for us on, if you will, a safe workplace. Was this a safe, did people feel it was safe to be here? And what did they mean by that? And one of the questions was related to the values that the school expressed and their own alignment to it. When the people who did the survey brought me into a room and said, look, we need you to see this. And I thought, oh dear, what's going to be revealed? You know, and it turned out they said, no, in all seriousness, we haven't seen alignment in other industries as high as this. It was something approaching 94%. And it did not differ between teaching and non-teaching staff. And that was, it was like a blinding light of revelation that actually purpose drives us. Purpose draws us together. And if you can unlock purpose and then express that in terms of giftedness and roles and responsibilities, but that we're all here for a common and shared purpose, which is the education of children and young people and the support of their parents in that great cause, we then can work through the other differences, which are largely traditional and cultural. So teachers and non-teachers allowed in the common room together at the same time? Do you celebrate occasions together in the same? All of that can be overcome if we then remember the purpose. And I've been able to almost strengthen my resolve, because I know that whether it be at the start of the year when we've got a big chapel service and I say everybody needs to be there, and I'm thinking, oh, they don't really want to be hearing this, and they're busy and they want to get on with their work. The grounds and gardens are calling them, and that's where they'd rather be. But actually, they want to celebrate purpose and their role in it. They want to have that role dignified and celebrated, make a cause of joy from others who respect their work. And we've been really very firm on this, that you pause for a moment and stop and you say, how's your work? And respect that work because it's helping you. And that we have this shared cause. That was a big step forward. Instinctively, it was natural, but it was strengthened by the data set, which I might say was a higher figure than I expected. And the other thing that really surprised me was the alignment. And it didn't bifurcate between teaching and non-teaching. Everybody felt that's why they were here. That's a powerful position from which to draw to the next, to solve problems and to draw the vision for the next.
That's a good position to be in, though, isn't it? Because I work across diverse schools and different areas and incoming principals and outgoing and so on and so forth. And a lot of what I find is there is, exactly as you say, it's either within the culture that we are us and them, or within the culture that we are all here for that same purpose. And education is fundamentally relationship based. We're in it because we are in it for heart. Whether I'm in accounts or I'm teaching or I'm reception or whatever I am, I'm here because of my heart generally. I've also seen in my work a much greater proportion of traditionally non-teaching roles then transferring into teaching. So people who are coming in as administration, reception, different areas, and then undertaking training with the support of Cool.
Yeah, good point.
Tim, have you seen anything like that in your school?
A little bit of it, yes, and vice versa. So there are a number of staff I've worked with across time who have started out as teachers and for whatever reason have wanted to be around people, but felt that they could do that in a non-teaching role. And then, yes, of course, staff member here has just done the transition in the last couple of years, and it's lovely to be able to be part of that opportunity. So coming back to the fit thing, you know, there's a whole host of people who actually want to love and support people, young people, and they can do it face-to-face in the classroom, or they can do it sometimes face-to-face around the school in other ways.
Absolutely. Vicki, I'm going to come back to something you said earlier about that perception of the sector, or changing the narrative around teaching and the importance and the perspective. Globally, there's very different views or respect for the teaching profession. What's your advice or thoughts on how we can improve and change that narrative to recognise the value and real respect for what everybody's doing in education?
I feel like the changing narrative needs to come from within and also externally. I mean, we know that teachers for a long time have had bad press, and that doesn't help. But then, you know, there's a point where teachers are saying that they're overworked, saying that they're very tired. And so that's the internal bad press as well. I think we need to change the narrative both inside and outside. And I think it'll take a push starting within schools, but also it needs to start at the political end. You know, we need to have a lot more positive perception about the teaching profession, value it. You know that in places like Denmark and in Finland and, you know, places like Shanghai, the teaching profession is rated in the same space that law and the same space as medicine. Well, we need to do the same thing, because let's face it, teachers, I mean, I'm the biggest promoter of the teaching profession because I've been in education all my life, but it's like teachers create these lawyers, teachers create doctors, teachers create every other profession. So let's really start that narrative, that positive narrative about the teaching profession, in the hope that we can draw more people into it, because we don't want there to be that shortfall that's been predicted. And because it's such a values and such a people-driven profession, I don't think it can ever be, you know, automated. There won't be a machine that will replace teachers. We need to, put the value back into teachers, I think, in every part of the narrative. So, yeah.
And we've got two really positive schools here, right? Like Phillip and Tim are leading schools where there is that connection and there is that respect and there is that feeling of inclusion and value from that side. So I guess what you're sharing is really, it's broader than that. So what would you be saying to our policymakers, our politicians, those people who are now getting that voice? What should or could they be doing to reinvent that?
Well, they need to be positive about the teaching profession as well, value the teaching profession. Yes, so it really does need to start there. And there are certain things I suppose that they can do is to help to introduce these programs and to put funding across to the teaching profession. And I think one of the things that we need to look at, I suppose I'm going a little bit off track there, is perhaps we need to be looking at a longer vision. I think we started off saying we can't keep putting out fires, we can't keep focusing on just the short term. And unfortunately, politicians have their short-term timeline in, you know, they have the 3 years and that's it. So I think we need to be looking at the bigger picture, at the longer term than the next 3 years, as far as the teaching profession goes, as far as education, in our country and greater goes.
Great comment, Vicki. It's so true. When I started my business, one of the comments that someone said to me was, we need to remember education's like Titanic. Everything is very slow to change because we've got so much structure and so much behind it that we need to work through. And politicians looking at that minute space, they're sort of missing half of the opportunity, aren't they? Mm-hmm. So look, Phillip and Tim, I guess you guys are sort of best practice in what's happening here, but what advice do you have for people who are wanting to retain those quality staff? And that's end to end across the school. How can you've spoken about purpose. What are some of those tangible strategies or workforce planning in that longer perspective we can be doing to retain those quality staff? Tim, do you want to kick us off first?
One of the things that I've done across time has been looking at what percentage of staff are part-time and what percentage are full-time. Now, if you are the person in charge of the timetable, as I was at the time, it's fiddly. But I did work in a school where a third of the staff were part-time. And what it meant was that young parents coming back into the workforce could do so in a way that was feasible for them and their families. And those who were coming towards the end of their career could likewise, instead of having an abrupt end to it, could continue to share their expertise, but come in a little less often. And so that buffering, I guess, of those coming back in and those finishing up meant that effectively we were able to put the best people in front of the students, even if it meant a little bit of pain for us in the organisation and the structuring of the whole of the place. So that's one way to do it. At the moment, probably for me, my focus is on saying, all right, how do we make sure that, given how many teachers there are across Australia, we're all not doing the same thing in different places? How can we keep sharing resources, even within the one school and one department, let alone across a sector or a state? There is potentially a lot of, I don't know, light but not heat, heat but not light by our continued reinvention. And the better we share, the more, in a sense, time we buy for people to turn the off-the-rack suit into one that fits perfectly. And then the more energy they can put into the people in front of them rather than trying to race around and do what's already been done.
So true. And that's why things like this evening are so important, where we can come together, and we're coming together for the common good and for the sharing across, you know, broader Australia as to what is happening and what isn't, and how we can go from there. So I've had a number of instances where I've done, as you mentioned, Phillip, the people and culture recruitment roles or talent management, where we've got people from all different school spaces sharing. This is what's worked for us. This is what we ended up doing. Here's a map of what, you know, the flow was. And I think that opportunity is quite big in sharing that information, as you say, Tim. And so then having us continue to build up. Yeah. Phillip, did you have anything else to add to that?
Oh, well, where do we start? It's such a big question, isn't it? It can be a bit two-edged sword, this. We want to retain our people, but actually I think we have an obligation to the profession to enliven and enable people to move around a bit. And there's a tension. I think it's a healthy tension, but there is a tension. In this community of staff here, there is a tendency to remain. And I love that. I'm so grateful for it. And it builds up stories of I taught your father or I taught your mother, and those really very deep cultural pieces that are going on. At the same time, I think there is a shift in the narrative probably for younger staff, that they're not expecting their kind of life position. They're now looking for a value add for them, and even though they may like it and are comfortable and it feels good and it's not a long commute, or they have a nice lunch or something rather like that as part of what goes on, they do want to know that the school is interested in their growth, and they're not just being plugged in and left alone. That their growth reflects something that's of interest to the school. So we're not just interested in the kids and their performance and their growth, but we're actually also interested in their teachers, and interested enough to sort of spend some time, sit and do some career planning and support for professional learning, and some rich personal experiences that might not have otherwise been something they considered, and then their development. So where are they now? Where might that go next? And that someone's taken a bit of time to think about that. Now, that was not the picture in my early years, anything like that. But I think one of the critical parts of the retention of really good people is for them to feel that they're not just doing the same and it'll be the same, and as far as the eye can see, it'll stay the same, it'll be comfortable, but it won't grow them. And there is a strong anticipation that they'll be growing, not just fulfilled now, but actually it's leading into a narrative. If you don't have that, then they get restless and folk feel, I think I'm wasting my time.
Such a good point, because we have different phases, career phases, life phases,
very
those
true
different moments. And I do a lot of profiling with educational staff and staff in other industries, and educational staff, no matter what the role is, are particularly high in terms of motivation by what you said, Tim, purpose and meaning, but also around consistency and stability. So a feeling of stability. And I think that is misunderstood often, as you say, Phillip, that doesn't mean I need to do the same thing. I still want to grow. I still want to stretch my knowledge, my capability, my opportunities, but within the framework of how I'm still giving back to that space. Vicki, we've touched a few times around those life stages, so people who are coming in to the profession in different areas, people who are sort of pre-retirement. I think there's a massive opportunity. There's changes in the sector. Obviously, what we've been doing in the past, where we're going to in technology-wise, definitely, which wellbeing, which we'll talk a bit more about at the moment. But there's opportunities for us, as Tim said, to learn from one another. How would you encourage schools to maximize how they use the staff they have and keep people growing, as Phillip mentioned?
I think we've got a huge untapped resource in our long-term teachers, not the teachers that have gone into, deputy principalship and principalship, the people that have stayed in the classroom. I mean, the highly accomplished and lead is trying to maximise on that. But I think there's a lot of people who've been in the teaching profession who have been there long enough that they don't really want to go into that whole space, but they're an untapped resource. Before they leave, I think we really should be making sure that they pass on some of their wisdom and, again, their resources there. Because a lot of people, you look at the statistics, a lot of people have been teaching for 30 or 40 years now. You look at how much rich experience is in there and how much knowledge is there. In education, we don't seem to tap into that resource enough. So I think that's really, really important. The other thing, I think, perhaps Phillip touched on that as well, is the retention piece is not just about retention within a school. I think that retention piece is retention in the profession. I think that's the big picture piece, that young people may get restless after 5 years in your school. Well, give them 2 years to go and try something else and give them the opportunity to come back. I don't think we do enough of this, being able to do job share or actually being able to swap with another. It used to happen when I was in my early teaching, but sort of teacher exchange, those sorts of things, they're opportunities that I think we've forgotten about, and I don't think that's done very often anymore. So that's something that does give the young teachers a different experience and a growth experience. So there's sort of ideas that I think we should be looking at as well. And I think the flexible, like the data that we get from our workforce benchmarking, is that flexible workforces, the ability of people both early in their career plus later in their career to be part-time, to do job share, is invaluable. If you can match up, a young career or an early career teacher with someone who's at their end of career, they're both looking at part-time for different reasons, then job share is a great thing. I know schools don't always like job share, but because they feel parents won't like it. But that's what we've got to sell to the parents. We've got to say, well, look, this job share is actually the most beneficial way. We've got two heads working for your children, not just one. So there's sort of things that we need to be looking at, changing, the flexibility of the teaching workforce.
I would agree. And Tim, you mentioned that sometimes it's logistically a bit of a nightmare for you guys, which is where sometimes that's where the problem comes, is that, well, hang on a minute, I've then got to do all of this other work. So let's work out where we can. I'm conscious we only have about 10 minutes left, and I really want to speak to you guys or raise the question around wellbeing. From Wellbeing Australia, we've been doing a lot of work and research over the last couple of years, and one of the pieces of feedback we've had consistently from people in education, and that's end to end, so from early childhood right through to tertiary sector, is a feeling that wellbeing programs are very focused around students. So students get wellbeing programs. And again, I have to say, I think you two are not the norm in terms of many of the schools in this space, but keen for your input and thoughts. Who's responsible for wellbeing, and who should we be centering wellbeing programs around? Phillip, do you want to start us off?
Thanks, Kathryn. This has been a bit of a Damascus road for me. I guess the first portion of my career, largely informed by the kind of privations that we were struggling with, I misunderstood and underestimated the importance of staff wellbeing as a coefficient on it in its own right. Expecting the adults to be the adults, I had a strong regard for their role as the caregivers, and that has been almost completely reformed. You'd be pleased to know, and I suspect the people who work with me will be very pleased to know too, because I am certain that it's a little bit like the metaphor of the putting the face mask on self before helping the people around you. The more staff are supported by wellbeing programs, the better equipped they are to provide that care. And so to put some language around that, it's not just enough to have a birthday cake or to do some nice little treats, have a coffee cart. Those things are nice and they're welcome, but to actually enter into some programs. And so we use mental health first aid, and we're trying to train some shared language. We think we can go further than that. So this is a really, really important space. And we've got now Deputy Head Academic Care, and a critical part of that and working with people and culture is the well-being of everybody, taking a view that we all play a different role, and that we want to actually nourish and nurture our staff just as readily, and not just with candles and bath oils and so forth. As charming and as welcome as that is, so some really concrete programs that equip people.
That's
we're not there yet.
No, and I think it's a continual space, right? There's no end point to this. There's no point, I believe, where we get to tick off wellbeing as we've achieved that mission, just as learning doesn't occur like that. But thank you for that honesty, because that sharing of where you were versus where you are is exactly what we need to be mindful of as leaders. None of us are perfect. We're all constantly evolving and we're working with moving parts. So the dynamics that are out of our control obviously continue to change as much as those that we try to control. So it's interesting to hear. You mentioned the candles and that. I always giggle because I do a lot of wellbeing work, and I'm usually before like hot yoga or something like that. I'm like, that's not what I'm doing, don't you? So it's a very interesting thing to me what people perceive well-being to be. Tim, what about you in that well-being space? What are your thoughts on that responsibility and how we best implement?
Yeah, look, just touching back to what we were talking about before, the idea of being a sending school is a pretty significant one for us. We want people to go from strength to strength. And if that happens to be elsewhere, so be it. We actually think that's a good thing. And I think the paradox in that is that people actually want to be part of it when they know that you're equipping them and willing to look at their best interests first. I think, and it might have been back to Rod West saying a well-coached team and a well-taught class is great for student well-being. I think in many respects, a well-run, well-organised school is great for staff well-being. So there is a sense in which there is a degree of calm and consistency to the way a school works and operates that enables people to relax into being themselves and to be a bit more of themselves. And when you can be yourself at work, that's not a bad thing. And it's also an enriching thing for the whole community. So it is nice to know a bit more about kids and their families. That gives a bigger picture of them. It's likewise good to know a little bit more about what's ticking over in the lives of staff beyond the day-to-day work, because that it gives a sense of where they are and how they're travelling in just a greater context. So for me, this might be a little bit counter to some of the points raised earlier. My approach is, how can I help you to do your work as best as possible? How can I take out of your work the impediments, the things that make it harder? And if that means that I don't have a very regular staff meeting with staff because that's more about me than them, then I won't do it. So how can I create space in their day so they can get on with it? And how can I create structures that will support that?
Yeah. Beautiful. Vicki, what would you be saying to our policymakers about how we need to approach wellbeing within our school, that within education broadly? What are we doing well and what maybe are some of the opportunities?
Well, it's a holistic thing. I mean, I think, as you mentioned initially, that wellbeing has been in education focused on students. Well, teachers model behaviour to students. So if you've got teachers that you obviously care for their wellbeing, if policymakers are caring for the wellbeing of teachers and the teachers are modelling those wellbeing behaviours, then your students are going to pick up on it. And I think there's another thing, I can't remember who said it, but I'm not sure if it's Steve Jobs or someone said, you know, if you look after your staff, they'll look after your clients. And again, you know, policymakers have to look after the teaching staff so that their wellbeing is catered for, and they're going to look after the students because that's where the heart is. That's why they're in teaching. And if you equip them with the skills, then they are going to model that and pass that on. So yeah, it really does start from the top. It's in education, it's a shame that we have always focused on students as the first point. We really need to also, in the whole workforce space, we need to focus on our teachers, focus on our workforce, and then that flows down to the students. I'm not discounting that the students are the centre of everything we do, but you know, to keep people in the teaching workforce and to keep their wellbeing high, we need to actually be looking at the top as well. So yes.
And there is that direct correlation. So there's plenty of data to show us that if staff wellbeing is poor, their interactions and management of behaviours will be poor. And we're human. At the end of the day, we are human. So if we are struggling, of course, that's going to come out. So we have to remember that, as Phillip said, the life, you know, putting that mask on myself first. From a wellbeing point of view, certainly from Wellbeing Australia, we're very much about positive, proactive strategies. And I loved hearing those things that all of you have said around that. The holistic approach to wellbeing is so key. And I guess just my 2 cents worth from my wellbeing hat is that recognition of what our core element of impact in our sense, no matter what life stage or phase I'm at, the number one thing that is going to crush my wellbeing is my sense of purpose. As Tim rightly said early on in this conversation, if I don't feel valued, if I don't feel like I'm growing, like Phillip said, if I don't feel like I'm extending myself or in that space where I can continue, that will flow into all other aspects of my world. And I think often we see in schools, exactly as you guys said, wellbeing programs encompass a bit of exercise and some free apples in the kitchen. So I think we need to think beyond that. And I've been very blessed to be part of a number of school communities where we're actually running career development as part of our wellbeing program. So staff across schools and families are becoming part of that understanding of that direct impact. Something I wanted to ask you guys to bring that into light is we've touched on the different aspects of staffing and we've touched on the importance of retention. How important do you think diversity of PD, professional learning, is for staff? What have you done to bring staff back into being keen to undertake that, and staff from all areas of the school to jump on board to want that growth?
Yeah, I'll jump in, and then I'm sure Tim and Vicki will add much more incisive remarks. But I think people want some agency in what happens to them in their professional learning space. That's been a really important breakthrough, I think, in the last few years. And then secondly, there is a huge appetite for choose your own adventure within the broad framework of school offering for PL. So because I think it was Vicki who pointed out that there is a life cycle, and you don't need to all hear the same thing at the same time. But that, yeah, there is some useful things to be gained. So I think that's agency would be the quick answer to that question.
Beautiful. Tim?
We worked hard in the last little while to ensure that the non-teaching staff have the same access to professional learning as the teaching staff have always had, because that's been a discrepancy across time. The other thing is that we look to support staff who want to do further academic study with partial scholarships, and that sort of expands the reach of things that they can do and thinks about the future at the same time. And it does sort of broaden the gene pool, if you like, of the offerings.
Beautiful. Vicki?
Yes, so well, that employee lifestyle, I think that's what Phillip was alluding to. So at different career stages, whether you're, teaching staff or whether you're non-teaching staff, you still have that employee life cycle, and you're still at a different stage in your career. So you're going to have different needs and different interests and aspirations too, because some people may have, as one of you mentioned, is that some of your staff have actually gone into teaching and some of your teachers have stepped out, so those career aspirations are not lifelong anymore. The prediction is that people are going to have multiple careers throughout their life, and so we need to actually understand that, and we need to apply that as well to everyone within our sphere of influence, our whole workforce. So I think that's important. Another point that you mentioned, Kathryn, is diversity. I think that's something that's really important. I suppose we started this conversation, and I think I mentioned something about bringing people into schools with different expertise in non-teaching roles. And I think I often go back to what Johansson referred to as the Medici effect. When you have that diversity of thought, when you have that diversity of occupation and experience, it's very rich growing for everybody, and it really does bring out the best in everybody. So I think that's a really important point to make as well.
Beautiful. Thank you all. It's been fun. We could talk for another 3 hours, so we can't do that, but I just want to thank you all for your honesty and your openness, because really I do believe that we learn best from each other, and those growth opportunities, they never end. That's why we're here and why we're having these conversations. Top of mind for me, really important things for us to continue to ponder and probably continue are discussions about that journey throughout our profession without the feeling it must remain in that one school. That growth and learning development, whether I be a leader or whether I remain in teaching role, because that's my passion, is about me continuing to get those opportunities and growth. Being able to undertake some cross-school mentoring. So having that recognition that we all bring different skills to the table. And so maybe there's opportunities to learn from each other in different spaces. And then the flexibility. So flexibility in how we're engaging people, how we're delivering PD, how we're undertaking different programs and those sorts of areas. And I think key to everything that we all touched on was that remaining learners, just remaining confident and comfortable in the fact that we don't reach an end where we know all, but remembering that we need to look at the data and the metrics, and we need to reflect on the current circumstances to make informed decisions and plan ahead. So I think it's been a wonderful conversation. Thank you all. I'm going to hand back to Fred just to wrap us up for the evening.
Thank you, Kathryn, and thank you for moderating so beautifully tonight. On behalf of the Teachers Guild of New South Wales Council, I'd like to thank our distinguished panel, Vicki, Phillip, Tim and Kathryn, for their time and dedication in engaging us all on a very informative discussion in the opportunities and challenges on our important topic today. The Teachers Guild of New South Wales thanks you for your friendship and congratulates you on the work you have been leading in making education the vibrant professional association that it is. Thank you. Just in terms of follow-up, the event recording will be sent along with a certificate of attendance and a short post survey to help us shape our future monthly online webinars. Thank you for joining us this event, and we look forward to see you at future Guild events. Please stay safe and well. Thank you.
Thank you.
Fred.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you.